Okay, great. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to this online festival celebrating London multilingual literary talent. And today we're at Verses in Many Voices, where we're gonna hear from some amazing poets. Before we start, I'm going to just share a poem with you, and then I'm going to introduce each poet individually. Um, and then I'm going to start off the kind of the event and have the wonderful poems that I've read. I've read everyone's poems and they're amazing. I'm going to start with a poem called My Humble Beseech. Oh, Sacred Heart, I did not want her to die, so I asked what I could do. Gather, she said, gather the nails that fixed him on that cross, the imprint of Mary's feet in the dirt, the tears of the disciples, the rumble of the big stone as it rolled back to block the tomb. Gather, she said, the sea salt pitched on the shore of Galilee when the sea wept. Gather them all for your intercession. I cannot, I said, that was too long ago. Well, gather tears of the wretched prisoners on death row. Gather their last confessions. Gather the tears of Virgin Mary dolls in Haiti. Gather the prayers of mothers for their dead babies. I cannot, I said. Well, look for death's twin, a burnished butterfly man with a top hat, naked, wearing a red loincloth. Where can I find him? Search in your dream, she said. So I searched for 40 days and nights. I searched in vain. I called to him with tears and white candles by my bed. I cannot find him, I said. He will not show himself to me. Then death will come like a lover, she said. He will take her gently. What can I do? Let go, she said. Let go. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to introduce our first poet. And I'm going to say, poetry, interestingly enough, is all about language. It's about us as poets trying to capture the world and create photographs and pictures with language. What happens when you're multilingual or when you have more than one language at your disposal? What type of poetry does that produce? We're going to hear poems tonight from different poets from different cultures, whose first and second languages are vastly different, and we'll be delighted by that work. The first poet that I'm going to introduce to you is the amazing Jennifer Wong, who was born and grew up in Hong Kong. Jennifer writes in English and Chinese. She's the author of 7 collections, including Goldfish and a pamphlet, Diary of a Miu Miu Salesgirl. Her latest collection, Letters Home, which explores the complexity of history, migration, and translation, has been named the PBS Wildcard Choice Spring 2020 by the Poetry Book Society. Yay. And her poem of Butterflies was included for the Forward Book of Poetry 2020. Jennifer studied in Oxford and earned a creative writing PhD from Oxford Brookes University, and she teaches creative writing at the Poetry School, Oxford Brookes and City Lit. Her poems have appeared in numerous pamphlets, but I'm not going to take up any more time singing her praises. I'll let you hear for yourself. I give you Jennifer Wong.
Thank you very much, Malika. Thank you very much, SOAS, for organizing this event. I'm here to read a few poems from my book, and I really enjoy this festival, and I think like lots of things kind of like trigger more thoughts on language. And so one of the first poem I want to share with you is called Diocesan Girls' School, and it's like about the way that I think when we were at school, although we actually speak in Cantonese to all our friends, but in actual terms, like the school is teaching all the classes in English, which is very foreign to me. But at the same time, we are supposed to crave for the power in that language. And so there's always this this feeling of inadequacy. And just to annotate, we have like Chinese history lessons and Western history lessons, and they are sometimes very confusing and overlapping, and something are not said in certain lessons. Diocesan Girls' School. We sing English hymns from the Blue Book as if those songs were our own, all things bright and beautiful. We read Jane Eyre and Hard Times, and how the pigs oppress Boxer and Clover in Animal Farm. In Chinese history lessons, we follow the roots of a ginkgo tree to spring and autumn, when Confucius taught his disciples Ren Yi. Western history, The Rise and Fall of Empires, a cartoon from Punch, 1840. China, a cake gobbled up by foreign powers. Sorry, in poetry, we fall in love with Plath, her fantasies, her fury against men. We want to let out her anguish. Some of us stammer in our own tongue. It's inferior, we know it. Secretly, we all love to sing cantopop. We dream of going away to England or America and never, never come back. So for me, language and home are really interrelated, and so Cantonese, as you can imagine, is my native tongue. And then, but because my mother, her family speaks Mandarin as well, so I sort of the other language is also Mandarin, but which was taught in schools. And I think I find what is bizarre is like those languages that these Chinese Mandarin or Cantonese, the way certain names are talked about really brings back the feeling of home. And also sometimes when I try to translate it into my work, I always find it very, it just brings me, makes me smile. Because, for example, I try to translate some words like lo fo tong, which is old fire soup, or lo gai, which is old chicken. But you wouldn't understand why people want to make dishes with an old chicken. And so I thought like that's like something that if spoken in your original language, of course that's very comforting. But sometimes through translation, we also learn the same thing, or we learn about home in a different language. So this one has to do with my love for soups. I grew up really drinking a lot of soups, and it's a very strong Cantonese tradition to have soups before the main meal. Personal history of soups. You taught me soups. A lo fo tong takes hours in the kitchen. Pig lung, best remedy for coughs. The swelling and collapsing of a massive pink sac filling the basin. Yellow cucumber and cowpea nourishes the skin and clears the throat. Chinese courgettes and lean pork dissipates body heat. My brother and I loved your tomato and fish soup. Your own childhood stemmed from the taste of egg flour broth your mother used to make. Coming home, a bubbling clay pot, steam rising from the lid raised by wooden chopsticks. The juicy cartilage between the softened bones. The butcher in England hasn't a clue if you ask for a soup bone. Say that again? The only one I can make nowadays is chicken and carrot, even without the fresh lo gai. You said that every Chinese woman must know how to make soups to catch a good husband. Except that Alex has never cared because he is a European vegetarian. The hot and sour soup has to have 7 ingredients. You can't call it hot and sour without wooden ear and pig's blood. Not authentic enough. I remember the milky white perfection of golden carb soup in our family haunt, Tilin restaurant. You kept reminding me to make more soups for myself, to build up my immune system. and also for beauty. Last time I called you to say I cannot find the green carrots. They don't grow here. Each year, I think of going back because of the soup. So I would like to share with you the last poem, which is quite new, actually. So one of my newest poems ever. So this one has some Chinese phrases, which maybe I shouldn't really tell you what they are. But the thing is, like, when I go back, I think like home for many of us, especially people who live in London, even just hearing like the sound or the very sound of a language that you know, even if you don't know that person, just brings back all the memories and the way, you know, the kind of comfort zone or the exact details that you know every single thing, how they are named. And I thought this is about Yamate, which was a place where I grew up. And I just find it fascinating that all these little graffiti that are in the mountainside, they are actually small Chinese characters like, that are actually promoting certain services, like professional services like water and electricity repairs and so on, or recycling, like recycling furniture. So I think I will share with you how like this is how, you know, how like language can brings back the idea that of the place where we know best. Home is in the balconies of rainbow-colored public housing blocks, each family's laundry flying in the wind. On the road opposite, a basketball court, a stationery shop selling old-school exercise books, calendars, and shuttlecocks. Two men playing chess under a banyan tree. By the traffic crossing, an old lady sells newspapers and manga while people keep scrolling their phones for a slice of reality. And in each evening, the market bazaar in Yamate, lit up by fairy lights, a place for clay pot rice, I Love Hong Kong magnets, and fortune cat decorations, where you hear 1,000 alarm clocks beeping all at once. Above it, a neon shop sign, Danan Lo cold herbal tea. You lap up the mischievous Cantonese. Here, anyone can read a bilingual effort on the lamppost, 收你水電冷氣家具回收. Anyone can tell you how to get to Sneaker Street. At Kauki, how many beef brisket noodles do they sell each day? Don't tell me you've never tried Chewa Cafe's sweet chicken wings. What is local? Step inside a pharmacy filled to the brim with milk powder tins, toilet rolls, toothpaste, Phoenix Beauty pills, and white flower lotion. You think of Nathan Road with his opulent gold and jade, and know that none of it is fake. This tiny, heartwarming dot on the world map. There is always life for you and life for me. Always the fresh Hagao siumai steamed to perfection. Our endless gossips over coffee or tea. And a silver lining in the mountain's silhouette. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Wow, Jennifer, that was superb. Just so beautiful. I just wish I wasn't hosting. I want to sit here and just kind of bask in the images and let them just seep over me. I just love the way we started with school. We ended up with soups, and it's a Saturday, and it's cold outside, and all of a sudden I want soup. And soups for husbands, soups for beauty. And each year I think back, you know, and then we end up with food again and sense of place. I wanted to ask you, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, you kind of answered already. So I wanted to ask you, in the first poem, you talked about writing, learning, you know, learning learning about history in double languages, you know, learning about history in English and learning about English literature and learning about. And then at the end, at the poem, there's this yearning to go to these places that you're learning about. I'm fascinated now because you're a poet, you're in Britain, you're writing, you're in the place that you were thinking about in terms of school. Has that changed for you, that relationship to language, that kind of confusion with, you know, Jane Eyre on one side and the history, local history and national history on the other side, kind of collapse, you know, knocking against each other, like my hands are knocking against each other here. So I wanted you to kind of talk about that because that intrigued me.
Sure, Malika, thank you for the question. I just think that it's quite interesting from because when we have this idea of distance, the sort of language brings us proximity and distance. And so when I was in high school, I felt that everything that I learned from the Western history textbook are pretty much very distant to me. All these characters and wars, even, I mean, we just feel that they're not related to us. And so it's very bizarre because, and then coming to England, you realize that you're actually situated here and things are real. You know, this thing that we used to study as text, there is, you know, this immediacy about it. And also, as in, for example, Animal Farm and so on, we treat it more like fiction or stories. We don't really understand what is the relevance. And so I find it very bizarre. And I think also in the sense that we romanticize a lot what is or where is Europe or what is England, and we don't really know so much the divide between Europe and England as well. So I think all these are very embedded in language, and we're really not. I guess we are all like, we kind of language helps us to understand a perspective, but we kind of looking out as well, and so it's a blessing to be able to have different language to compare things with.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your beautiful reading. There's so much people complimenting you in the chat, so you know you can sit back and bask in that. And we'll move on to the and thank you for answering my question so beautifully as well. So we'll move on to the next poet. Oh, it just gets more and more exciting as we go on in the night. I hope that you have like your cup of tea or your wine, you know, or your crisp, and that you're treating this as if the living room or wherever you're watching from is a kind of cinema, you know, is a kind of movie, because we're gonna be in a movie of words, especially with our upcoming poet. Shephali Frost is a screenwriter, poet, and musician who works across English, Hindi, and Urdu. She writes poems in Hindi, but sings Urdu poems. Trained in Indian classical music, she performs traditional Urdu ghazal and nazum compositions, as well as poetry by 20th century authors, including Fazil Ahmed Fazil. She composes her own work and collaborates with other composers, both in India and elsewhere. A recent project has seen her research the work of Urdu poet Mazaz. Her prose and poetry are published in English and Hindu. Her poetry touches both on political themes, religious nationalist violence, poverty, and ordinary people watched at the crossroads, inside dim-lit houses, at metro shops. And without further ado, I hand you over.
Thank you very much, Malika, and thank you so much, Soaz, because, you know, up until now, I just never imagined that my writing in Hindi could ever be a part of my life in England. It was always something that happened in another part of the world, in India, and of course, in my studies. So it's actually, I'm in a state of shock right now that, you know, and also Francesca, because I said to Francesca, I can't translate my work without writing a new poem. And Francesca insisted and helped. And I mean, this is just, I am in a state of shock. I really am. And, you know, usually my heart doesn't thud when I'm about to perform, but right now I'm thinking, this is not real. So I will, I will read my work to you without contextualizing it, because I think because then I'm getting into a territory that I was very scared of, which is reinterpreting and interpreting my work for a non-Hindi speaking audience. So I won't do that. You've got the translations for that. So Moti Aurat, जिसकी गर्दन बट रही है टैल्कम पाउडर की लकीरों से, कलफ लगी हरी साड़ी में लिपटी, पोंछती है पसीना चेहरे का फाउंडेशन में घुला, खरीदती है सड़क से सूती रुमाल 10 रुपए में 4, वो मोटी औरत जिसे नहीं पता कब लड़की से आंटी, आंटी से माताजी हो गई। रिक्शे वाला भी पूछता है आंख भरकर उससे, भार ज्यादा होगा तो दाम ज्यादा लगेगा ना माई। जिसके टखनों में कालिख है घिसी हुई पाजेब की, छिपाती है दिवाई छितरी हुई चप्पल में डॉक्टर शोल की। वो मोटी औरत जिसने पान मसाला खाना शुरू नहीं किया अब तक, गुड़गांव शहर में मॉल के बाहर कर रही है इंतजार जवान बेटी का, जिसे ले जाकर अंदर सजता हुआ देखेगी अपने आप से बिल्कुल अलग, जिसे थोड़े से समय के लिए घर में रुक जाना था, जिसके बढ़ते बच्चों को अंग्रेजी मीडियम पढ़ाई में डूब जाना था और उसे भी कहीं सपनों की राह निकल जाना था। वो मोटी औरत जिसके काम करना बंद कर चुके अंग उगल रहे हैं आग 50 साल की उम्र तक उसे निचोड़ लेने के बाद, लौटती है टाइल लगे ठंडे फर्श पर ग्रुप हाउसिंग के मकान में हर दोपहर अकेली, काम वाली के चले जाने के बाद, जिसकी मांग के दो पार उभर रही हैं लकीरें सफेद रंग की सपाट, पोत लेती है रंग हर नएपन पर अपने काला और खुशबूदार। वो मोटी औरत जो चिपचिपी कंघी से काटती है बाल, सजती है चाय की प्याली में गरम पोहे के साथ, उसके साथ टीवी देखता है 33 साल पुराना दफ्तर से लौटा अफसर नुमा अजनबी हर शाम, जिसकी हिलती खाल पर खींच गए हैं लिसड़ती उम्र के नाखून, जो कपड़े उतारती है दरवाजे के पीछे अपनी ही नजर बचाकर हर रात। वो मोटी औरत देती है अपनापन उस चुने हुए अजनबी को, बत्ती बुझाकर धुली चादर में छुपाकर, मांगे जाने पर कभी कभार। लो वोल्टेज के मकान। आसमान एक लकीर है पीली, चढ़ गई है तलुओं से घुटने की कगार तक, बचा नहीं उजाला खिड़कियों के पास, जो सुलगा दे बाकी की जांग, निकल जाए धधकती हुई वो लो वोल्टेज के मकान से। कौन उठकर दरवाजा खोले? बैठे हैं बेत की कुर्सियों पर अंधेरे, जी रहे हैं बुझे कमरों में बिना आवाज किए कुछ लोग। And this is the last poem called क्या। क्या ये चौराहे पर सिटपिटाई हुई औरत, हरे कंटोप में संभाले दुधमुहा बच्चा, हार सकती है अपने 5 पति लाल बत्ती के जुए में, उतार सकती है गले में सजा रत जगों का तमगा, बढ़कर आगे उलट सकती है अमरूद वाले का ठेला, 2 रुपए में एक तो वरना शोर मचाऊंगी। तुम लुटेरे हो, छीन रहे हो बच्चे से मेरे पेड़ पर झूलने का हक और टहनी से लटक जाने का हक जो सिर्फ मेरा है। क्या तोड़ सकता है रोडवेज की नीली बस का ड्राइवर राम गुलाम, चढ़ाकर पहिया सूर्या प्रॉपर्टीज की खाली पड़ी 10 मंजिला इमारत, जहां घुप अंधेरे में चांद की अर्थी दे रही है कंधा उन 5 परिवारों को, जो जकड़कर बाजुओं में एक दूसरे फिर तीसरे को मर गए शहर की सर्दी से, उन्हें और कोई घर नहीं मिला। फैब इंडिया की सुनहरी किनारी निगल रही है उस लड़की का दुपट्टा, जो बीच ट्रैफिक में खड़ी है मेरे लिए, कटोरा भर कड़वे तेल से भरे मीठे उलाने के साथ। अठन्नी डाल रही हो, ये है तुम्हारा शनि का दान। 10 रुपए में 5 बेच रहा है बॉल पेन नारियल और रुमाल, खटखटाकर बंद गाड़ियों के शीशे, बाजू से नाक पोंछने वाला अधनंगा लड़का। उस सड़क किनारे पैदल चलता 50 पैसे का एक गिलास पानी पीकर कुल्ले करता तेल लगे बालों से में कंघी घुमाता आदमी उतार सकता है धूल से भरा चेहरा जो शहर की गलियों ने उसे बिना पूछे पहनाया है? उड़ सकता है क्या राजीव चौक पर चीर कर मेट्रो की छत गीली पीली लाइन की भीड़ में अटका वो मॉल में टाइल पोंछने वाला लड़का जिसने आज लड़की देखी नवेली, जो हवाई जहाज में बैठकर जा रही है सिंगापुर सधे हुए माँ बाप के साथ, जहां वो ठाक देगी उबासियों से अपनी आईफिल टावर, स्टैच्यू ऑफ लिबर्टी, लीनिंग टावर ऑफ पीसा और वो जितनी भी इमारतें हैं जिन्हें देखा है उस लड़के ने कोनी ट्रैवल के पर्चे में। पहले फ्लोर के एस्केलेटर से निकलते ही बास्किन रॉबिन के बाजू वाले बाथरूम के पास छोटी काली गाड़ी में 40 पार की औरत जो हरी बत्ती के बीचों बीच रिवर्स गियर में निकाल रही है 20 साल में पहली बार। पति की नामुरादी, ससुर का गुस्सा, बिना सिंदूर की मांग, बच्चों की फीस, चावल के दाम। बिफर रहा है कम ख्याली पर उसकी वो हरी पट्टी वाले स्वेटर का आदमी ऑफिस कैब से उगल दिया जाता है जो कॉल सेंटर की सीढ़ियों पर अंदर और अंदर, नीचे और नीचे, जो हर लंच में बाहर आकर गुमटी पर कॉफी पीता है, शकरकंदी खाता है, ठहाके लगाता है उन पट्टियों पर जो रौंद रौंद कर उसका सीना सिलाई और ऊन से भेजती है चिट्ठी हर महीने की पहली तारीख। बाथरूम की छत धसक गई पिछली बरसात, ब्लड टेस्ट वाले का उधार चुकाना है अब की बार। उतार सकता है कपड़े खुले आसमान तले वो बंगाली रिक्शे वाला जो आगे वाले ऑटो की पीली पिछाड़ी पर देखता है कोका कोला पीती हीरोइन। झटकता है माथे का पसीना बाएं हाथ की मुड़ी उंगली से, एक हाथ से घुमाता टेढ़ा पहिया, दूसरे से उठाता है कीचड़ में गिरा मोटा आदमी। करेरती है खटकती आंख टेरलीन की पीली साड़ी में उसकी जोरू, एजी इससे तो गांव क्या बुरा था। वो आदमी मुंह से निकालता हुआ झाग जो खड़ा है हाथ लपेटे उखड़ी दीवार के प्लास्टर से, जिसके शरीर का निचला हिस्सा गीला हो रहा है और जो अब नहीं सोचता सड़क पार करती वो धानी साड़ी वाली औरत उसे देखकर मुंह पिचका रही है। कैसे कहे उस बड़ी गाड़ी वाले आदमी से, तेल लगी मुस्कान से तुमने दिल नहीं खींचा मेरा। भर दिया बस्ते में मेरे ढेर सारा आक्रोश जो काफी था पहनने के लिए कल। आज उतर रहा है सड़कों पर उनींदा सैकड़ों पहियों की मशक्कत के बाद, टेम्पो के पिछवाड़े में, पहिए की रौंद में, कॉफी की दुकान में, शनि के दान में, अमरूद के पेड़ में, मेट्रो की चेन में। भीड़ इतनी है लेकिन आदमी कुल्ला करे कि तकरार, प्यार करे कि मन भर सिंदूर डालकर ताकता रहे आसमान। निगल जाता है ये शहर, खिड़की से आंख, दरवाजे से धड़, अकेले ही अकेले, अलग ही अलग।
Wow, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. I absolutely love I wanted to just close my eyes and disappear into the work. It was like hearing the music of the place and then also reading, almost like being in a film. I love Bollywood films. It was almost like being in a Bollywood film. There's the scale and the scope of all the visuals that you portray. And then here you are with the musicality of the poetry in its original language. What I wanted to ask you about, I'm really struck by your poetry. It's kind of almost like these portrayals, these portraits of people. In the first one, this portrait of this woman and her life that she's gone into. And the second one, this kind of magnificent, kind of small, I can see there's a small portraiture, but the scope as well of the last one, which seems to kind of capture not only, it captures all these individuals, and every time you go on them, it's almost like a cinema camera just moving across everybody individually, but it also captures a sense of place. Do you think if you'd written those poems in English, or if you translated them, or in translating them, kind of because your body is positioned in Britain, do you think that writing them and not working with Francesca in them would have kind of giving us a different type of poetry, or a different, would it have been that cinematic and that
Well, I think because I started writing as a screenwriter. And I think I don't write poetry, I just copy poetry. You know, I see things and then I just write them. So all my poems are like that. I see them and I just copy them out in whichever language they are facilitating themselves. So funnily, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to answer this question had I not been writing. I'm writing my third collection in English. And there's a lot of stuff about India in there, but all that is also visual. So I think, yes, I mean, yeah, in any language, this is how I probably would be writing, because this is my voice, you know, which moves from language to language.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Gosh. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited. Every time we go on to the next poet, I'm even more excited because I've read the work and I know what's coming. And so I'm using my excitement to prepare you in the audience, you know. Yeah, take a sip of that beverage because it's just gonna escalate. So we go to Mustafa Abusi Nayanai. Nayanai.
Mustafa Abu Sneineh.
Nayanai, I got it. I just got it back. I stopped because in the middle of hearing it, I thought that does not sound right. Okay, so we go to Mustafa Abusi Nayanai.
Yes.
Is a poet from Jerusalem, Palestine. His first collection of poetry, A Black Cloud at the End of the Line, was published in 2016. He holds a degree in law from Beaziz University and an MA in Postcolonial Studies from Goldsmiths College, London. He's contributed to the work of Forensic Architecture, which is based at Goldsmith, in which was nominated for the Turner Prize in 2018. Mustafa has contributed to the newspaper Al-Akbar and is a staff writer at Middle East Eye. English translations of his poems in Arabic have been published by Critical Muslim. Without further ado, I hand you over to Mustafa.
Thank you very much. My first poem, the title of it is Emperor. And I wrote this poem while reading a book titled The Meditations by a Roman emperor called Marcus Aurelius. And he I think mostly he wrote this book while he was at the front, like in Europe, and I think probably in North Africa. And he kind of like, you know, speak with the soldiers and speak with the officers and kind of write his own lines of meditation. And one of the lines was about a bee. So I took this line from his meditations and I wrote a poem about it. أيها الإمبراطور. ليس صحيحا أيها الإمبراطور أن ما لا ينفع السرب لا ينفع النحلة. اسمح لنحلة مثلي أن تصحح تأملاتك بهذا الخبر. ما عاد هنالك من سرب لأطير فيه ولا من أزهار برية لتفهم لغتي. الخلية سحقت تحت بساطير البرابرة. خانها من خان. ولو كنت أحفظ صلاة لرتلتها على روحها الباسلة. زمن النحل ولا أيها الإمبراطور. دعني أطير بأجنحة المتقصفة إلى هاوية أخرى. فأنا لا عسلا ولا شمعا تركت ورائي. وكل وردة حطت عليها رطنت بلغة البرابرة. دعني من تأملاتك فأنا لن أنفع أحدا. وسياني إن عاد السرب أو ما عاد. سياني أيها الإمبراطور. So the second one called Bisan checkpoint. And this is an actual checkpoint which is close in the Jordan Valley, where mostly the road on which this Israeli checkpoint was installed is kind of connects the Jordan Valley and all of the region of Jerusalem to the north, near the lake of Tiberias and the Galilee. And it's one of the checkpoints where each time you pass, because it's controlled by a private security company, they will stop people and search them very thoroughly. And it is kind of in the middle of nowhere. If you go there in the summer, it will be hot. You know, the sun is so sharp. And I passed through this checkpoint a few times, and I wrote this poem just inspired also by, you know, my ancestors' history in Palestine, which is also including, you know, the Christian history, because it is part of that region, what we call it, you know, the greater Syria, which is include also Palestine and Jordan. حاجز بيسان. كدنا نمشي على بحيرة طبرية لولا صلبنا على حاجز بيسان. ساعات من الصلب المقدس، ساعات من ترقب يد جبارة لتنجينا. عشاؤنا الأخير طبخته الشمس، وأقداحنا سكر بها جنود البرابرة. طال صلبنا بين القدس وطبرية دون أخشاب ومسامير، لن يصدق أحد صرخة المصلوبين. دون أخشاب ومسامير لن تردد صرختنا الكتب والتراتيل، وسوف تشوي الشمس أجسادنا لجنود البرابرة. So the third poem, titled Maqdisi the Geographer, and it is actually, as you can read, it's Abu Ali Muhammad Ahmad al-Maqdisi. He was one of the famous geographer who wrote like a book which has been used, I think, until the 14th century or 13th centuries. I'm not sure exactly when, but it was really influential informing all travelers or all geographers at that time in the Middle Ages. So I was really struck by reading this book that many terms we taking it for granted today, like the places and the name of the seas and the lakes and rivers. It's totally different. So you can see it as a way of looking at the geography, or also the territories in a different way of as we see it today, and we take it also for granted. So I came across him like giving the Dead Sea different name, and I was really struck by it, the way he saw it. So this poem is about الجغرافي المقدسي. ستخبرني أن البحر الميت كذبة أطلقها الإغريق، وأنك سميته البحيرة المقلوبة. ستخبرني أن الشمس إكليل شوك على رأس النهار، وأن الطين على جسدك كان آخر كلمات نطقتها كليوباترا. البحر الميت كان أم البحيرة المقلوبة؟ ليس من فرق ما دامت عيون الأرض تجود له بالمياه، وأنت من عينيك تجود له بالملح. The last poem is called And it speaks about an ancient Asian warrior. I think that we learned this folk story in the school, where he see an ant after he has been defeated in one of the battles, like taking one of the grains and walking and getting on the wall, then falling, then taking it again and falling. So he say, he was saying by himself, if an ant keep trying, I should keep trying fighting. So he got back to the war, and he won it. So I don't know exactly how this poem, why I wrote it, but it just like came while I was just sitting somewhere. So coming like probably a memory from my childhood from the school. نملة. تحضر قصتي إذا حضرت قصة الحرب، فلا أحد يكترث بنملة شجاعة إلا حين يتأملها قائد مهزوم. إنني أسقط وأسقط وأنهض كلما روى جندي قصتي. يقولون إن لغة الحرب تخرج من مخازن الأسلحة، لكني لا أعرف إلا لغة القمح، تلك التي أحملها منذ سنوات لكي أسقط. ليتأملني القائد كلما شاء. يوما ما سيأتي من يروي قصتي التي أعرفها عن قائد مهزوم تتأمله نملة شجاع. Thank you.
Wow, Mustafa, I thought those were exquisite when I read them, but hearing you read and reading them with your voice in the background just raised it. It just tremendously, it felt mythical. And you had said a line in your poem, let me fly on fractured wings. And it feels like that's what that almost captures your poetic, that the poems that you read tonight, they're flying on fractured wings. They're almost like lyrical songs. And you said something about geography and territory. And I wonder if a part of writing in a language, in your home language, means that there's a way that maybe you look, because you're in another place, is there a way that you look back on the myths and on the happenings in the geography that kind of affect you, that you see in a different way, almost like the soldier looking at the ant? That is that a way that encompasses your poetry in a way?
Yes, it's not like a simple answer, because since I wrote those poems, I kind of I changed. So
Right.
and I kind of realized how much land, like al-ard, as we say in Arabic, which is probably translate as earth, but homeland, al-ard, it's the land itself, the mountains, the rivers, the trees, the forest, everything, the land, and we are part of it. So growing up like in Palestine, which is like a conflict zone basically has been constantly for the last 100 years, I realized that one of the kind of cornerstone or the fixed element that really tells about my poetry and my creativity is the land, and all the histories that shape the land. And one of the difficulties is that it is separated, and it is like it has been cut into pieces. So I use writing, reading history and reading poetry and reading like literature from Lebanon and from Syria and from Jordan and Iraq is in a way to like bring new air into my own creativity, because this is also part of my land that I can't reach. You know, Baghdad is part of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem part of Baghdad, and Damascus is part of Beirut, and both of them part of Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. So I could not answer this question 5 years ago, because the more, you know, I get older, like in age, I kind of become more understand these details and these elements of history and literature, and so for example, when I read the Maqdis, the geographer, these stuff was not in my mind. These metaphors and these ideas were not in my mind. But just now reading my poetry, like now I realize how like land is very important to me.
Thank you. Yes, I noticed that, you know, that land in geography. I like how you say like earth is like air, and that being able to have to kind of reconnect with all these different spaces within a single geography that you weren't able to was like air. I don't know why, like a poet, that just resonates with me. I think that's what the poet does, you know, plots language, you know, tries to kind of crystallize that air, I think. Thank you very much, Mustafa. That was really, really beautiful. So we're going to move. I'm going to do my excited or shiver, because there's no clapping. So, you know, I know you're there clapping away and shaking your hands and thumping your, you know, your couch and stamping your feet, because you're like, how exquisite is this? So I'm going to introduce the next poet, Fatima Hagi. Is a poet, communication specialist, women's rights activist, and mental health advocate who co-founded www.safespacesforblackwomen.com. Fatima was raised in London, but spent her early years in Somalia and Kenya, her ancestral homeland. Her passion for human rights has seen her revisit East Africa, working for the United Nations and using her writing skills to raise awareness on marginalized societies. In 2019, Fatima managed the hugely popular Somali Week Festival, an annual arts festival run in London as part of Black History Month. She writes poetry and stories which draws on her experiences and reflections on notions of displacement, hybrid identities, and womanhood, and has performed in numerous venues across London, and is currently working on her debut collection. Can we kind of put our hands together in that silent Zoom clap for Fatima, please?
Thank you, Malika, for that gracious introduction. I appreciate it. I have 3 poems. The first one is short, and it celebrates the city, the great city that I grew up in, London. I'm currently in Kenya, Nairobi, but London is just, yeah, I identify more with being a Londoner than I do with being British for some reason. I think London just has that strong kind of bond and identity for us. So it's called The Muse of London Streets. Strolling down Carnaby Street, admiring all the clamorous lights, bright and jolly folk writing their wish list. Down the back ends of the West End is where you find the dreamers, the nighttime callers, like fairies roaming the streets. In this chilly weather, it's the lights that keep me warm and illuminate the way. The city breathes at night. It reeks of yesterday's mishaps. It moves and sways like joy resides in its hips. It lives in every melody ever hummed and hawed. Hand in hand, meddling with dusk, we danced till dawn took us home. And that's my experience of London at night. I just love flaneuring around London and getting lost, and yeah, it's such a beautiful place. This next poem is called Rob Dawn, which is loosely translated to a solemn plea for rain. So in Somalia, oftentimes we have a lot of drought, and people congregate in towns and cities in congregational prayer for Rob Dawn, which is like the plea for rain. So really praying to God that we get the rains. And I was working for the United Nations in Somalia, and I got to witness this Rob Dawn, the plea for rain, congregational prayer. And it was such a beautiful experience for me. And then that took me into so many different memories and thoughts about, you know, my associations with rain, living in the UK, in London, where it rains a lot and we don't really appreciate it. In Somalia, it's such a, you know, it's such a blessed thing, and there's a scarcity of it, really. So, Rob Dawn, a solemn plea for rain. Where once my ancestors walked for days across a level plain, in the scorching heat, followed by their camels and weary livestock, searching for heavily overdue rain. In the month of November, I sat by the porch amongst town dwellers, watching the children play in the rain, splashing and rejoicing in garments of colourful array. Without a care in the world, even the adults were led astray to join the rain dance. And in a way, I admired their childlike freedom to laugh and play like no one was watching, uninhibited in free terrain. Intrigued by their free reign, I wondered about my own fight for indefinite leave to remain. Only weeks before, they stood congregated in the town square, with hands held up like branches reaching for the skies. In communal prayer, they chanted with assorted dialects, Rob Dawn. At home in London, on rainy days, I relish quiet moments sat by the windowsill, lamenting imperfect prose and taking long overdue breaks in between each sip and stanza. On those days, I would be caught in the thick of it, desperately clinging to my flying umbrella, hurrying home in a flurry, windswept, trapped between fleeting thoughts and the everyday flow of life. There was something quite satisfying about reaching home, to drive by the radiator, bestowed with the scent of cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom, tea infused with a little loving from back home, to warm my tender heart. As each cupful overflowed with virtue, the day slowly trickled away. And the last piece I'll read to you, it's called Sweet Potato Pie. So I'm part of an organization called Exiled Writers, Inc., and it's a literary organization based in London, and we have, we organize literary cafes at the Poetry Cafe in Covent Garden, and we also run poetry workshops. So I'm part of one of the poetry workshops, and our teacher brought certain objects for that particular lesson, and the thing that I picked up and gravitated towards was a lemon. And that invoked all kinds of memories for me and associations. And then I became so fascinated with making sweet potato pie, which includes lemon zest. And then this is how this poem was formed. Sweet potato pie. Behind every rich and decadent bite of sweet potato pie, there's also tradition, joy, struggle, and love, especially for those who adorn thick melanin skin. Its history is as rich and exquisite as the dessert itself. As I think of lemon trees I've touched in the south of Italy and Spain, memories become entangled with lemon trees at Ayele's house in Merere, next to the papaya tree, where my uncle would lift me up to pick a few. Small, chubby fingers would wrap around the round golden ball, which excited me, but I wasn't as pleased upon tasting its sharp juice. In my kitchen in London, I add lemons to all my cooking, whether savory or sweet, the acid-infused dishes from home and elsewhere. My favorite is a lemon zest added to sweet potato pie. But where do its roots lie? Seeped in years of oppression, working hours upon hours in fields meshed with a legacy of exploited soil, growing beyond the eye's scope, accompanied by twilight and lanterns. Women like my grandmother would scrape the remains to make food and preserve the lost home across seas, a preservation of culture through taste, an infusion of two lands, a tongue-twisting taste of goodness. Lemons are like the memories I hold close, brought before me in a nicely packaged yellow ball, filled with so much hope, in cleansing the past of its haunting aftertaste. And what is life without a little sting to bring you back to reality, awakening all the senses in attempts to heal the past and soothe the present of its many paradoxes. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Fatima. there's something about your poetry. There's something kind of zen about it. There's a bit where you say lemons are like memories I hold close, filled with so much hope in cleansing the past. And what is life without a little sting? And I feel like that's what your poetry is like. Your poetry is like praise and lament all in one. You praise London, you praise the streets, but then in the middle of it, there's this waiting for a decision to be made, or you know, here we are, the memories of your grandmother, but then the lemon has a sting. And it feels, yeah, it feels like lament and praise and prayer and song and stuff. And I was wondering if having access to multiple language, if it has an impact on your writing in any way, and if any of this comes from a kind of poetic tradition, this kind of praise and lament, holding it together. It's very unusual to kind of have that in British poetry.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you for that question, Malika. I grew up with my mother reciting Burambur, which is a type of poetry that's chanted by women, Somali women. And I always used to see her writing it and chanting it and singing it because we have a very rich oral poetic tradition. In fact, Somalia was called the land of poets by the colonialists when they first arrived. They called it the land of poets because people communicated with poetry, and even warring tribes would communicate through poetry and they would resolve issues through that. So I come from that rich poetic culture. And although the language that I think in and the language that I hold and conceptualize ideas is English, but I very much do still have that Somali tradition of poetry and oral tradition, which I very much value. So it kind of becomes entwined in a way. And I think that comes out in my poetry. Sometimes I struggle to separate Somali and English, and because in my, it's both a part of my identity, and I've become comfortable with being an in-betweener, being in between two worlds. There was a time when it was a conflict when I was a teenager, but now as an adult, a woman in her 30s, I feel like it's such a privileged thing to be an in-betweener. I'm proud in-betweener.
Oh, I love that. I think we're a whole evening of in-betweeners on this stage. I love that. That could be the next, Francesca, that could be the next title for something that you do. Yes, lovely. So I'm going to do my little clap shiver that I do in between every poet as we prepare for the next one. And they're all so gorgeous. It's like having like oranges in a basket, but each orange is, even though they're all oranges, there are different shapes and different textures and different sweetness and different bitterness and different zest. So as we go on, I'm trying to find more ways to describe everybody and to build the kind of evening. So we've come to the part of the evening where we have Nada Menzalji is a Syrian poet, author, journalist, editor, and translator. She left Latika, her hometown, to London in 1998 and is now a freelance journalist at the BBC. She was the poet guest of the United Nations celebration of International Day of the Arabic Language in Geneva in 2019, and she took part in many poetry festivals in Europe and the Middle East. Her published collections in Arabic include Withered Petals for Dinner and Thefts of a Nameless Poet. Oh my God, such beautiful names for collections. Can you imagine going to the shop and going, could I buy a copy of Withered Petals for Dinner? And can I have, and also, can I have another copy of Thefts of a Nameless Poet? And she appeared in 2 poetry anthologies in French and an anthology of Syrian poetry from the 1990s. She'll read her poems in Arabic.
Well, thank you very much, Malika. Thank you for Sawas and Francesca and for writers in exile as well. The first poem I'm gonna read, I'm gonna look like copying Fatima because it's kind of celebrating London as well. So the first poem is called Land of Strangers, and it's about Brixton. Actually, I wrote it standing out the Red Sea Cinema.
Mhm.
After spending a few hours going around in Brixton, enjoying myself there, and it was raining and there was somebody playing guitar as well. So it's more like it's a picture of what was really happening there. At the same time, it's a very symbolic because it's how can I say, it's, you know, it's the diversity, the richness, the easygoing atmosphere, the welcoming, easygoing atmosphere that give you the sense of belonging. So this is the first one about Brixton. أرض الغرباء. And sorry, it's been translated by Valentina Vane. أرض الغرباء. لست غريبة في بريكستون، حي الأفارقة والجنوبيين. أنا جنوبية أيضا. لدينا نفس الضحكات المبللة وأمزجة كالبراري الوعرة. شعري أجعد مثلهم، أحمله دغلا صغيرا فوق رأسي. طلاء أظافري مكشوط، خاتمي يغطي نصف إصبعي الأوسط، الإصبع الذي يشهره الجنوبيون في وجه العالم، مكتفين به كنصر شبه أوحد. لست غريبة بين باعة السمك والدجاج والفواكه الاستوائية. لست غريبة وأنا أشرب العصير المغشوش بالسكر والمنكهات. في بريكستون السماء اللندنية نفسها، لكن الوجوه حارة والقبعات أقواس قزح. في بريكستون أجلس بقرب الرفاق كسرب من البط الأسود، أفكر على الأغلب مثلهم بما ظننت أنني تركته خلفي ونجوت. حقيبتي معلقة بحرص في رقبتي وعلى كتفي ملتفة كالهم، فلو خطر لأحدهم أن يستعير شيئا لن يستأذن، مفضلا ألا يفسد الود بالشكليات. وبحميمية من يسكب من طبخه للجيران سيتمهل بالمقابل وهو ينفس دخان لفافة الماريوانا أقرب ما يكون إلى أنفي. وحين تدور النادلة توزع ما في صينيتها على زبائن الرصيف بجسد وفير مهتز ونزق خفيف في عينين مثل قطيفة من حنان، تترك في الأصقاع ألفة كأن بيتا بعائلة ممتدة من الجدين إلى الأحفاد يتجول على ساقين. في بريكستون برد وتمطر أيضا، لكن العازف الكاريبي يدغدغ بطن جيتاره الآن. The second one is a short one, so it speaks about itself. صمت. منذ زمن طويل لم أعد أخبر أحدا بما يحدث لي، وحين أمر بشجرة أدير رأسي وأصفر لحنا مرحا. الأشجار كالأمهات، حزنها صعب. أفضل صحبة الحصى، قلبها قاس والكل يدوس عليه. This one being translated by عاطف الشاعر, and the second one as well being translated by him, by عاطف الشاعر. It's called بقع. It's called a dark spot on the back of my hand. This poem, I was meeting my friend in Maidavale, and she gave me the address of the place we should meet in. And on my way there, she sent me a message and she changed her mind. She found another place, still in Maidavale. But it was a bit difficult for me to find it. And later on, she was blaming me not to know Maidavale properly after so long time living in London. On my way back home, in the tube, I wrote this poem, of course, the first version. This poem is about knowing the places, not from the geographic information, but through feelings and memory. What about if I have a very, very special memory in Maidavale? What about if I met my lover there, in a house there? It's about broken memory, because that woman who met, let's say her lover in a house in a memory in Maidavale, she so much wanted to go back to that moment, but it's a bit difficult to bring back the memory. And as well, this little story could happen everywhere, could happen in every area in London, in every other city, whatever. So, بقع داكنة على ظاهر الكف. بلى، أعرف ميدافيل التي أنطق اسمها بخفة الآن، كما يمكن لعمياء أن تحدث تاريخ الأماكن كلمة الروائح بارومتر الألوان. وقع الخطى في الشارع، رشفة اليد التي تدير مقبض الباب. ميدافيل، جسر عبور إلى ضفة الحب. كان كل شيء جاهزا حتى أنني أشعلت الشموع. بيت كبير في ميدافيل، لابد كان ملكا لأحد قبل أن تصادره ذاكرتي. أنا فراشة تحوم حول شفتيه، أنا كرة صوف تحل خيوطها أصابعه، أنا التي في حضوره يؤلمها فكاها ولا يمكنها التوقف عن الابتسام. أنا المرأة التي تسللت إلى بيوت الآخرين في مدن الآخرين لتنتظر رجلها، لا تتوه عنه بأسمائه المختلفة. الأشجار الوقورة في الشارع خلعت ملابسها على عجل. حبيبي مر من هنا. يأتي منظف النوافذ ويذهب، سنوات وهو يأتي ويذهب، يتسلق سلمه إلى نافذة الطابق الأعلى. تلك هي غرفة نومي، جاهزة لأترك له متعة التلصص على غرفة خالية، لولا أنني لشدة شبهي بالنساء الوحيدات ما زلت في قميص نومي حريري بشياله المقطوع أتقلب بين الملاءات. أفسدت الماضي لكثرة ما عبثت به، وشوقي لا يتركني ملتصقا بي كتوأما سياميا برأس واحد ورافع برأسين، كتوأما سياميا برأسين ورافعة نهدا واحدة. لولا أن منظف النوافذ باغتني هذه المرة أيضا عالقة تماما عند لحظة إشعال الشموع. أعبث بالمدن، أضع أسماء الشوارع في الخلاط، أضيف البيوت كمكعبات من الثلج، أتركه يدور ويدور مصدرا تلك الضجة اللانهائية لتكسر الذاكرة. أشعل سيجارتي، أنظر مليا إلى البقع الداكنة على ظاهر كفي. إنني أتقدم في السن، رغبتي هائلة في الحكي، وكتعويض غير مقبول أزداد مهارة في التورية. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nada. That was absolutely fantastic. Am I getting a feedback?
I don't know.
Oh, I don't know what that is. It's silent on my end. Your poetry, for me, it felt like conversations. It felt like the poems were, I don't know if it's the journalist in you, but it felt like the poems were a conversation you were having with the poem, trying to capture either the mood or the kind of atmosphere of an area, of the external, of what you see in terms of the Brixton poem, or the internal of what is revealing, of what the poem is revealing emotionally. And I found that quite interesting. I wanted to ask you about the types of conversation, and do you have conversation with your translators when they're translating? And what does that show you about your own poetry, that process of translating, of talking to someone who is moving your poetry from one language to another, from one culture to another, from one kind of thought or worldview to another?
Yes, of course. I mean, the translator is my, you know, the bridge, you know, to move my poem from Arabic to the word, to another language. And yes, we had lots of conversation together. Of course, it's a kind of mutual work, you know. Of course, the difficult part, it's on them, not on me. But but we have lots of conversation, and it's interesting because sometimes I understand, well, I mean, there is something not very clear in the poem. I understand it through their understanding, and I change, you know, sometimes. And sometimes I feel fascinated by the way they come out with the word. It's exactly as I wanted to say it in Arabic, or as it's been saying in Arabic. I'm fascinated by the understanding between other people, other culture. You know, this subject is very important for me. But to see how my word is, you know, have echo in the mind of other person. How it's gonna, you know, talk to his heart. How can the word touch the heart or not? So this is very important for me. And it shows a lot through translation.
Wow. There was something that you said for me there, and I know that, you know, Chris Beckett is in the audience. I'm sure there are other translators, but there's something that you said there for me that reminds me of some of the work that Chris does, which is, does the poem touch the heart, and the notion of ritual. And I suppose the ritual brings up the notion of honoring. I suppose if there was a translator in this space, talking to them would yield other answers about trying to honor, trying to, you know, be truthful to the work, but also in being truthful to the work, understand that they might have to translate it or change something. So it's quite interesting. I just always want to be a fly in the wall for those conversations between the translator and the poet. Thank you so much, Nada. That was beautiful. I'm going to do my little shiver now, shiver clap for the next and the final, you know, poet coming on. It's been a fantastic evening, and it's good to know that we still, you know, there's sometimes when the evening is so fantastic, we want more, and it's good to know that we're going to get more. So I'm going to introduce the last poet to come on the scene, and then we'll have a conversation, and then I'll sum up. And poets, I can't do it, but I urge you to read the comments, because I think people have been, in lieu of clapping, people have been writing their praise and pouring it out onto the chat. So just check that out. Alemu, Tebeje, Ayele, is an Ethiopian exile journalist, teacher, poet, community activist, and website campaigner based in London. He studied Ethiopian languages and literature and journalism at the universities of Addis Ababa and Wales, respectively. He was also awarded a diploma in education and training at the University of Westminster, and his poems have been published in 2 anthologies, Forever Spoken and No Serenity Here. and other online and print literary magazines, including Modern Poetry in Translation and The Missing Slate. His first bilingual Amharic English collection of poems have been published by Tamrat Books under the title of Greetings to the People of Europe. I love that title. You guys have some great titles. What? Greetings to the People of Europe. I just want to go into a bookshop and say that, could I have Greetings to the People of Europe, please? Thank you very much. He co-admins a website, www.deathraw.com, named after the Ethiopian literary giants, and is a founding member of the former leader of the Ethiopian student movement, poet and Amharic language expert. Yes, can we put our hands together, please? Alemu.
Thank you, Malika. I think one point is missed. We recently, I and my friend, poet Chris Beckett, we recently published a book entitled Songs We Learn from Tree,
Okay.
an anthology of Amharic poetry in Amharic, and it's published by Karkanet, and it's on sale on Amazon and almost all bookshops. So saying that, thank you very much, Malika, for the introduction and the organizers. I'm going to read 3 of my poems. All these works and other of my work, my poems have been translated into English by Chris Beckett. Fortunately, he is with us. He is here. And I and Chris, we run also a small publishing company called Tamrat, means the miracle. So our plan is to translate Amharic poems and literary works into English. So far, we have published 3 booklets, bilingual booklets from Amharic to English. So the first poem I'm going to read is Greeting to the People of Europe, or in Amharic, Salamta ለአውሮፓ ህዝቦች. This poem is dedicated to all African and Middle East refugees who died on Mediterranean Sea while trying to reach Europe. And I was inspired by the famous speech of Jomo Kenyatta on the arrival of Christianity to Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, says, when the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. So here I am challenging Europe, reminding them about the teaching of their forefathers, which in fact followed by subjugation mentally and physically. So ሰላምታ ለአውሮፓ ህዝብ አባቶቻችሁ በምድርም በሰማይ አቆራርጠው መጥተው በአፍሪካ መጽሐፍ ቅዱስን በገፍ አሰራጭተው ለቀደምቶቻችን እንደዚህ ያሉ ፍቅር ነበር ሰብከው ጉንጭህን ለሚመታ ደግሞ ሁለተኛውን ስጠው መጎናጸፊያንም ለሚወስድ እጀ ጠባብህን ደግሞ አትከልክለው አሁንም የነሱ ልጆች እኛ የአባቶቻችሁ ልምድ ወራሽ መምተኛ የሴል ለርፋት የግፍ ሰለባዎች በአገር በቀል ጨቋኝ የዕድሜ ልክ ገዢዎች ባህር አቋራጠን ባረጁ ጀልባዎች አስፈሪ ማዕበር የተፋን ግልቶች በጨዋማው ንፋስ በድንበር ጠባቂ ወታደሮቻችሁ በጥፊ ተላክተን መለመላለችንን ቆመን ከፊታችሁ ከሞት የተረፈን ይዘው እያወጡ ዘይት እንደቀቡ ብርቅ ወፎቻችሁ ይኸው መጨረሻ ማንኳኳት ይዘናል ደርሰን ከበራችሁ የተስፋ ቅራሬ ተስፋ በመሰነቅ እንዳልተረሷችሁ እኒያ የፍቅር ቃላቱ ለኛ አባቶች እናንተ ያኔ የሰበኩት The next poem is La Touristos, means to the tourists. It's a reminder for the tourist to Ethiopia. እናንተ ቱሪስቶች የምትሄዱ ሀገሬ የእግሬን እርምጃዎች ከተውኩባት ምድሬ አንድ ማስታወሻ አለኝ አንድ መልእክት አብሯችሁ ተጉዞ ስትመጡ አብራችሁ የምትመልሱት ከተማ ገጠሩ የሀገሬ መሬት የምታዩት ቦታ ወይም የምትረግጡት ለሰብአዊ መብት ለህዝባዊ መንግስት ለፍትህ ነፃነት ታግለው ሲያታግሉ በጽናት በህብረት በጭካኔ ሳጭደው እየረገፉበት ከስሩ ያረፉ ሰማዕታት አሉበት ከሚቻው ፕላን ወጣችሁ ስትሄዱ አደራ እንዳትረሱ በፌሽታችሁ ማን ደስታቱ ማታ ቀስ ብላችሁ ሄዱ ተጓዙ በርጋታ የነሱን ጮት ለማጥመት ስሞታ ለኔም አድርሱልኝ የማክበር ሰላምታ ናቸውና አንቆች ከተሰደድኩበት ያገሬ ስጦታ The third poem is የግሪንፊልድ ህንጻ ድምጾች it is called የግሪንፊልድ ህንጻ ድምጾች means the voice of Greenfield Tower. Actually I wrote this poem in memory of the Greenfield Tower victims who perished or killed by the fire in June 2017. የግሪንፊልድ ህንጻ ድምጾች ሐሽምም ይጣራል የባለቤቱም ድምጽ ይጣራል የሶስት ልጆቹም ድምጽ ይጣራል ህንጻን ወሬ አቃጥሮ ያጨካኝ ነበልባል አሁንም በሐሳቤ ሁሌ ይነዳል አዎ ሰማለሁኝ የሚነዱ ድምጾች ከተቃጠሉት ታዳጊ ወጣቶች ባልቴት አዛውንት አዎ ማርኮም አለ ይጣራል የወንዶች ሴቶች የማውቃቸው ሁሉ ድምጻቸው ይሰማል አዎ የዘይነባም ይጣራል ከአውቶቡስ ማቆሚያ ሰላም ጎረቤቴ እንዳታደርክ ይላል በርናንድም ይጣራል ላቲመር መንገድ ላይ ባቡሩ ጣቢያ ብዙ ታይተናል የኑራም ይጣራል የሰቆቋ ድምጾች ከሚነዱ ስልኮች ጎልቶ ያስተጋባል የሃኒያ የኢዝራም ይጣራል ስለ ደረጃዎች ስለ ጥቅጥቅ ጭሱ ማፈን ይናገራል አይናቸው ቢፈስም ስለ ህንጻው ቋያ አሁን ለመመስከር በአካልም ቢለዩ ከውስጡ ለመኖር አንቶኒም ይጣራል መልካም ሰላምታቸው ከፈገግታቸው ጋር መንገድ ላይ ይመጣል አዎ የማርያም ይጣራል ከጭሱ ጋር አብሮ የሁሉም ነፍሳቸው ወደ ላይ አርጓል ጮርቃው ጀረሚያም ይጣራል መንደርተኛ ሆነን ለአመታት ኖረናል ይሄው አሁን ደግሞ ስላማማቷቸው ዋቢ አድርገውኛል ከሚነዱ ነፍሶች የሚነዱ ድምጾች ሁሌ ይሰሙኛል ብዕርህ ስለ ሀቅ ይመስክር ይሉኛል የሊጊያ ድምጿ ይጣራል ማህድም ይጣራል ስለ ጉርብትና ምን አደረክ ይላል ሁሌም ሰወጣ ድምጾች ይጮሃሉ ዘወትር ስገባም ለማወቅ ይሻሉ በክብር ይሳጡን ውስጥ ለምንድን ታጉረው እንደተቃጠሉ የት ነው መኖሪያ ቤት ፍትህ ያለው ብለው ሁሌ ይጠይቃሉ የኑራን ቤተሰብ ድምጻቸው ይጮሃል የከድጃም እንዳድ ድምጻቸው ይሰማል የማላካም ድምጹ የጀሲካ ድምጿ ትኩም አብሮ ድምጹ የብሩክ የናቱ የአሊ የይስሐቅ ድምጽ የዚያ የቀንበጡ ይጣራል 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 Thank you. I finished my poems. As Chris is with us, I think if you allowed Malika, if you allow him, he can contribute a lot to our discussion as we are working together to translate this and other poems.
Chris is shaking his head going, no. He's like, this is your spot. I am in the audience. He wants you to take your limelight as the poet. I think I know Chris so well, I can read him. He's like, no, this is you. This is not this is your poetry moment, you know? So bask in it. So I have a question for you as I have for everybody else. Your poetry was so moving. It was moving reading the poetry, and it's quite profound how you move across countries and time scales with the poetry. At the beginning of the lockdown, I read a quote by the poet Kwame Dawes where he said, "This is the time when poets must speak," and he seemed to be indicating that poets are the only ones eloquent enough to sometimes be able to capture things, you know. In language, is what the poem's trying to do is capture, and I love what Mustafa said earlier. It's like capturing air. And there was something powerful about leaving the voice of that last poem in the calling. And also, my God, calling seems so insignificant when we hear your language, how you say calling just really like pulled all the pores out of my body and pulled the pores onto my skin. And even if I hadn't had calling there, I would have thought weeping, moaning, wailing, you know, just all of that. And I wanted to know how is it, what is it like kind of writing to something like Grenville or something like the passage of everyone coming over in the Mediterranean? What is it like writing and trying to capture something that is in the news, that is so topical, and trying to get to the heart of it? And how does language play a part in that? Is there a process of translation that's happening for you in terms of what you're seeing and what you're trying to record, and in terms of writing, thinking in Amharic or thinking in English? And I suppose I want to ask someone, I wanted to ask today, when you think of the first line of the poem, this is what I wanted to ask somebody. Does it come in Amharic or does it come in English? That's it. That's my question.
Yeah, I think it comes into Amharic, to be honest, because Amharic is my mother tongue, and almost all of my works have been so far written in Amharic originally. If not for the encouragement and support of Chris, I would produce a single poem in English, to be honest. So it comes to me, and in Amharic, and almost with the exception of this Greenfield Tower poem, all of my works are dealing with Ethiopian issues related to my home country. So the subject is also Ethiopian. So the yeah. Yeah.
And for this, sorry, I thought you hadn't finished speaking. So let me just continue.
Yeah, and also. For your surprise, both the first and the last poems were triggered by the tragedies. Actually, the first poem I wrote it when, if you remember, it was on the news. About 800 or plus refugees died on one day on Mediterranean Sea. And I remember watching the news. I couldn't help it, really. It's very sad. I was so angry. I was so sad. I couldn't help it, but just to release my anger, to release my emotion, I wrote this poem. So, and this also Greenfield Tower, I'm living, unfortunately, I'm living just one block away from Greenfield Tower. And I know most of the victims. And some of them were my friends, and 10 plus victims are from Ethiopia. I know them very closely, most of our community members. Also, as a neighbors, I have been living at my current address for the last 20 plus years. So I know most of the victims assist by face. So it was tragic, and everything reminds me, the station, the building, so the bus stop. To release that emotion, I wrote this poem. And, yeah.
Thank you very much. And the poem so resonates, and sometimes we have no language for something, and your poem at the end, it enabled us to kind of be able to evoke and to be able to remember and to remember to grieve, but to also remember to kind of salute as well, you know. So thank you. So my goodness, we've come to the end of, I can't even, there's no shiver left. I told you that, you know, we would just go from amazing poems, poet to poet to poet to poem to poem to poem. So I'm going to end by just kind of reminding you of what you heard, just bring back everybody back into the forefront, and to thank you for all your comments to the poets. Because I'm concentrating so hard, I haven't been able to read it, but out of my side of my eye, I can kind of see it. I hope I can read it later. But we started off with Jennifer, with beautiful language like the balconies of rain, bow, and the family's land, laundry flying in the wind, and the tiny heartwarming dot on the world map. There's always saying there's always life for me. And then we went to Shephali, Frost. A skeleton moon rises while in the utter darkness, fine families or more hutch close to one another, and the sky is a yellow line rising from the soles of her feet. And then Mustafa, with the hive have crushed under the boots of the barbarian, soldiers with guns beating the sunset until it passed out. And this poem is one of the lies that war lies, these letters and words, a liar. And Fatima, lemons are like memories I hold close, bought before me in a nicely packaged yellow bowl. And nobody's ever written about tea like this before, but tea to warm my tender heart as each cupful overflowed with virtue. And then Nada, the decent trees along the road quickly undress themselves. I want to see those trees undressing themselves. The bag carefully hanging across my neck, the strap on my shoulders curved like grief. And Alemu, who we just ended with. Powerful poems. So when you step off your new plane and walk into the feast, please do not tread lightly, softly. And of course, we have to end with cold waters of fear. Let salt winds punch our faces, and your coast guards pluck us from the water like oily birds. But I think that one of the things that all of the poets do here today is call forth song and language, and create portraits and create such beautiful visuals for us, such beautiful, tender healing for us, such beautiful, tender words, that I think I'd love to end with that phrase that I think they were all doing tonight, to you as an audience, and to us, and to the translators as well. And that is 3 refrains: calling, calling, calling. I hope you had a good evening. Thank you, Soaz. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you
very
all
much.
the poets.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you, Malika. That was a brilliant session. And I mean, if we can just imagine if we were now in the Museum of London and we could kind of bask in the presence of each other. And, you know, after listening, and I think you'll agree, you know, listening to the poems in their own language was completely different from just listening to the translation, wasn't it? So,
yes.
You know, it was a bit clunky, the PowerPoint, but we thought that would be the best way to, you know, for you for us all to experience. And I don't know, I mean, again, I often find London is a very multilingual city, but in literary terms, it often feels very English. So for me, that was really important to, you know, listen to all these other voices that are there and that are so powerful and so enriching and so broadening our sense of the world. So thank you really very much, everybody. I need to thank, can I say a few thanks at the end? So thank you, of course, Sarita, and she may want to add a word at the end, but thank you very much, Vayu, Malika, Wenchin, but also Martin Orin and Cosima Bruno, Alice Guthrie, Joe Bingham, Angela Perchiacca, Renata Albuquerque, Jack, who actually managed the slides because he knows both Arabic and Hindi, and some other language too. But most of all, thanks Sneineh for you know, managing the whole website, sort of campaign, all the media, with such, you know, in such flawless and timely manner. She has been really, really amazing. And as I said at the beginning, if you don't mind, those who participated, I think actually also you poets and hosts, if you don't mind sharing with us some of what you felt, or, you know, you thought that this day made you think of or gave you, because that's really, you know, I was tapping all the wonderful phrases that you came up with, and they're so much more inspiring and evocative than some of the, you know, terms that are so that sort of social scientists or, you know, we scholars came up with. So thank you very much, everybody. I don't know if Sarita, you want to say something, or
Hi, thanks, Francesca. Yeah, just to say it's been a really wonderful afternoon and an evening of just shared experiences, the tensions of multilingualism, the beauty of it. There were some gut-wrenching elements there, kind of felt like with Alemu's poetry, but also just beautiful heights as well. And yeah, it kind of makes me even more regretful that we're in this pandemic and we were not able to have this at the Museum of London, where we could have all kind of just gathered in small groups afterwards and had a lovely drink and conversed with each other. That would have been amazing. But we haven't been able to have that, but we have still had something really incredible here this afternoon. So it's thank you again so much for everybody who was part of bringing this event together. We eventually made it happen, and I hope somehow our paths will cross soon. Our paths and our languages will cross paths soon.
Okay, bye everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you for having
us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much again. Bye.
Yeah.